In the quiet neighborhood of Oak Haven, where streets were lined with neat gardens and trimmed hedges, there lived a man named David Miller. To anyone passing by, his life seemed simple, ordinary even. But within the walls of his home was a story of sacrifice, silent endurance, and the weight of responsibility that only a steady man could carry. David was not flashy, not the kind of man who entered a room and demanded attention with charm or charisma. Instead, he was a type who spoke less and did more, a man of actions rather than empty promises. His life was built on a foundation of discipline, routine, and quiet strength. He woke early, left for work while the house still slept, and returned each evening with groceries in his hand and weariness in his shoulders. But he never complained. Providing for his family was not a burden. It was his calling. Years ago, when he met Clara, she was a woman carrying more than just her own heart. She had 2 children, Jason and Maya, still young but old enough to remember their biological father, Leo. Clara was cautious at first, uncertain if David would accept her children as his own. But David, with the same steady patience that defined his entire life, assured her that love was not about blood, it was about choice. He chose her, and with that choice came Jason and Maya. From the beginning, David poured himself into the role of stepfather. He fixed the leaky faucets, shoveled the snow off the driveway before anyone else woke up, and built a home where Clara and her children could feel safe. Bills were paid on time, the fridge was always stocked, and the lights never flickered. The house ran like a machine, smooth and dependable, because David made it so. But the quiet truth was that while David worked tirelessly to keep everything together, Jason and Maya only ever tolerated him. To them, he was not Dad. He was simply David, the man who lived with their mother, the man who stood in the shadow of their real father, Leo. They remembered Leo as charming, fun, spontaneous. They didn't remember the broken promises, the missed visits, or the way Clara used to cry alone when Leo didn't show up. What they remembered was his smile, his laughter, the way he made everything feel like an adventure. To them, David could never compete. Still, David didn't give up. He didn't raise his voice or demand affection. He thought that over time, consistency would prove his love. Children, he believed, would one day recognize the truth, that showing up every day mattered more than making grand gestures once in a while. So he kept showing up, day after day, year after year. But the cracks in this picture-perfect suburbia were always there, just beneath the surface. Jason grew into a teenager with sharp tongue, often mocking David's strict rules about curfews and chores. Maya, quick to follow her brother's lead, dismissed David's attempts at advice with eye rolls and sarcastic comments. Clara, caught in the middle, often chose silence. She loved David deeply, but she was afraid of pushing her children further away by forcing them to accept him. And so, she let the disrespect slide, hoping time would heal it. For David, it was a quiet kind of pain, not the kind that explodes in anger, but the kind that lingers like a dull ache in the chest. He would fix the broken fence in the backyard, only to watch Jason kick a ball against it without care. He would spend hours repairing Maya's laptop, only for her to mutter, "Thanks, I guess," before walking away without a glance. Small things, maybe, but each one chipped away at him. Still, there was one bright light in David's world. His daughter, Lily, his own flesh and blood, born into this blended family. Her smile was like the morning sun that made all the heaviness bearable. Lily adored her father. She would run into his arms when he came home from work, chatter endlessly about her day at school, and watch her with eyes that saw him not just as provider, but as a hero. For Lily, there was no question of real or not real. He was Dad, always Dad. And it was for Lily more than anyone else that David endured the cold shoulders and sharp words of Jason and Maya. He wanted her to grow up in a home that felt whole, even if it meant swallowing his pride. He wanted her to see what a steady father looked like, even if her siblings never acknowledged it. But the balance of this delicate family was fragile. David often wondered how long he could keep giving without breaking, how long he could carry the weight of responsibility without recognition, without even basic respect. He never voiced these thoughts. To Clara, he said only, "It's fine. They're just kids." But in the quiet of his own mind, he sometimes asked himself, when will they see me? When will they understand what it takes to build and hold a family together? The truth was, David had already built more than a house. He had built the walls that kept them warm in the winter, the roof that shielded them from the rain, and the stability that let them sleep peacefully at night. But he had also built invisible walls inside himself, walls to protect his heart from the sting of rejection, from the loneliness of being needed but never wanted. And though he didn't know it yet, those walls were about to be tested in ways he had never imagined. For every man has a breaking point. Every father, no matter how patient, no matter how strong, can only endure so much before silence hardens into resolve. David's moment was coming, quietly, like a storm building on the horizon. For now he still hoped. He still believed that a steady love would one day be enough. But Oakhaven, with all its quiet streets and polished lawns, was about to witness the fracture of a family and the rise of a man who would no longer beg for respect. He would demand it, not with words, but with actions so unshakable they would echo in every corner of his home. And it all began with the man who built the house. Every family has its shadows. For David Miller, the shadow that haunted his home had a name, Leo. Leo was Jason and Maya's father. On the surface, he was everything David was not: charismatic, spontaneous, full of laughter, the kind of man who could walk into a room and instantly light it up. He was a hero in their memories, the one who could make them forget homework, chores, and even disappointment, if only for a few hours. And that was the problem, because Leo never stayed. He was a visitor in the household, a fleeting comet that burned bright and disappeared, leaving behind a trail of unkept promises and broken routines. David, in contrast, was the sun that rose every day without fail, but to Jason and Maya, he seemed dull, unremarkable, too serious. They didn't see the countless nights David had stayed awake helping Maya with a school project, or the weekends he spent teaching Jason how to fix a leaky sink instead of letting him play video games. They only remembered what they were missing. Leo's visits were always dramatic, exciting, and completely unreliable. One afternoon he would show up with tickets to a theme park, a backpack full of candy, and a grin that made the children's eyes sparkle. A week later, he would be gone for days, sometimes weeks, claiming work, claiming life, claiming something that kept him away from the real responsibility of fatherhood. And yet, despite this, Jason and Maya idolize him. They romanticize his absences as adventurous. They excuse his failures with shrug, as if charm alone could cover a mountain of neglect. David watched it all with a quiet ache. He never argued with the children when they praised Leo. He never demanded they love him in return. He understood that admiration for a parent was complicated, even messy. But he also knew that this blind loyalty to Leo was teaching the wrong lesson, that promises were optional, responsibility was optional, and respect could be commanded through words and charm alone. Clara, too, had been caught in the shadow of Leo's memory. She loved David with all her heart, but she feared her children would see him as a replacement, a man trying to step into shoes that were too big. Sometimes she excused their rudeness, told David he was too strict, too rigid. "They're just kids," she would say. "You don't have to win them over every day." But David wasn't trying to win them over with fun. He was trying to show them that consistency, effort, and presence mattered more than grand gestures. He was trying to teach them that family wasn't about who showed up occasionally, or who made you laugh the most, or who promised the moon. Family was about showing up when it mattered, day after day, rain or shine, with no applause required. He remembered the first time he truly noticed the hold Leo had over his children. It was a Saturday morning, and David had made pancakes, the aroma filling the kitchen, hoping to spend a quiet day together. Jason and Maya sat at the table, scrolling through their phones, barely acknowledging the breakfast. Then, suddenly, the doorbell rang. Jason's face lit up immediately. Maya dropped her phone and ran to the door. Leo stood there, holding a skateboard and wearing a grin that seemed to promise the world. In that instant, the pancakes, the clean kitchen, the warmth of the home David had built, none of it mattered. The children's eyes shone not for the man who had cooked for them, but for the father who had shown up with excitement and vanished just as quickly. David watched them silently and felt a tight knot form in his chest. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter, something heavier, the knowledge that no amount of effort on his part could compete with the illusion of the absent father. And yet, he did not speak, did not argue, did not confront. He simply cleaned the dishes, a quiet witness to the allure of irresponsibility. Over time, the pattern repeated. Leo's rare appearances were celebrated as though they were miracles, while David's daily sacrifices went unnoticed. Birthdays, report cards, scraped knees, David was there. Leo was remembered. And Clara, caught between love and fear, often didn't offend David as she should have, hoping that the children's idolization of their father would fade naturally. But it didn't fade. The shadow of Leo lingered in every room. It was in a way Jason would mutter under his breath about how boring David was, or the way Maya would roll her eyes when he suggested rules for homework or bedtime. It was in their smiles, reserved only for the rare moments when Leo appeared, like fleeting sunlight through storm clouds. David endured. He endured because he had chosen this family. He endured because love, he had learned, was patient, steady, and unyielding. He endured because he understood that one day his presence, the consistency, the reliability, the quiet strength, would matter more than the charm of an absent father. He endured because of Lily. She would never doubt him. She would never be swayed by appearances. And through her, he could see the impact of what it truly meant to be a parent. Still, the tension grew. Every smile for Leo, every slight for David, was a small fracture in the foundation of the home. And David, patient as he was, knew the time would come when these fractures would demand attention. The house, carefully built with love and responsibility, could no longer sustain the weight of illusions. The shadow of Leo was not just a ghost from the past. It was a challenge to authority, to respect, and to the very structure David had worked so hard to create. And deep inside, he understood that one day that shadow would have to be confronted, not with anger, not with yelling, but with something far more powerful, the unshakable force of quiet action and the truth that responsibility always outweighs charm. In Oakhaven, the calm streets held their breath, unaware of the storm brewing behind the doors of David Miller's home. And inside, the man who had built the house began to steel himself, knowing that the days ahead would test everything he had stood for and reveal who was truly the foundation of this family. It was one of those evenings where the quiet of the Miller household felt heavier than usual. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, even the wind brushing against the windows, all seemed louder in the tense air. David sat in the living room, a stack of bills beside him, while Jason and Maya lounged on the sofa, scrolling through their phones, eyes flicking up occasionally with smirks that carried more defiance than curiosity. David had learned to read those looks. They were precursors of something he had been dreading but anticipating for years, a direct challenge. He had endured snide comments, eye rolls, and backtalk, but there's a difference between casual disrespect and a frontal declaration of war. That night, the declaration came. "You're not our real dad," Jason said, voice low but firm, like a judge delivering a sentence. He leaned back, arms crossed, daring David to respond. Maya echoed him, a teasing lilt in her voice. "Yeah, you don't have any authority over us. You can't tell us what to do." She smiled, a smile that was sharp enough to cut. So why don't you just try? For a moment, the room was silent. David's eyes didn't narrow. His jaw didn't clench. He didn't rise to the bait. He simply looked at them, steady and calm, the weight of years of patience in his gaze. And then he said nothing. This silence was not weakness. It was not surrender. It was a choice, a quiet, deliberate blade being sharpened. David had thought about this moment countless times. He knew that words alone could not teach respect. Words could be argued with, dismissed, laughed at. What mattered, he knew, was action. Clara, who had been hovering in the hallway, felt the tension and stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. David, they're just kids. Don't take it so seriously. But David didn't answer her either. He understood her fear, her instinct to protect her children from confrontation, even when they needed it most. But tonight, he realized it was not about protecting them from him. It was about protecting them from the lessons they refused to learn, about respect, responsibility, and the difference between a parent who shows up and one who disappears. He thought of Lily, swinging her legs at the dinner table earlier, innocent and trusting, oblivious to the cruelty that had become routine. She believed in him fully, and he would not let her learn the same lessons the older children had yet to understand. That charm and absence would be confused with love and authority. David left the living room silently, not in retreat, but in preparation. He went to the study, pulled out a set of keys he had kept tucked away, and examined them. Locks, Wi-Fi passwords, subscriptions, privileges, all the things the teenagers took for granted, were suddenly in his control. And for the first time, he allowed himself to think in terms of consequences, not just patience. The decision was cement hard in his mind. The time for lectures, for gentle reminders had passed. Respect would not be begged for. It would be earned or it would be enforced. And for Jason and Maya, this enforcement would be quiet, meticulous, and undeniable. Later that night, while Clara prepared dinner, David began quietly, methodically. Locks were changed. Wi-Fi access was revoked. Streaming accounts and game subscriptions disappeared. Credit cards that had once been used freely were now inaccessible. Small privileges, once thought of as invisible lifelines, were now firmly under his control. The response was immediate. Jason's voice rose first. "What did you do? Why can't I log in?" Maya's phone buzzed. "Mom." David messed everything up again. Clara looked at him, panic rising. "David, please, this is too much. They're just kids, don't..." David raised a hand, calm but unyielding. "Not my problem." The words hit harder than any shouting ever could. They carried the authority of someone who had built not only the house but the rules, the privileges, and the safety of every corner of it. This was not about punishment. It was about consequence, about showing that freedom without respect has limits. Jason slammed his fist on the table. "This isn't fair. You can't just..." "You've been told," David interrupted softly, his voice even. "Respect is earned, not demanded. And you've been disrespectful in my home for far too long." Maya's lips trembled with fury. "But Leo..." He would never do this. David's eyes narrowed just slightly. The mention of Leo, always a shadow in the room, only strengthened his resolve. He didn't argue with comparisons. He didn't need to. Action spoke louder than words. Leo's absence had taught Jason and Maya something, but now it would be reinforced with reality. Clara stepped closer, hand on David's arm. "Please, don't make this worse." He shook his head, gently but firmly. "Clara, this is already worse. They've been learning entitlement, not respect. This stops tonight." In the kitchen, the smells of cooking were overshadowed by the tension in the house. Lily, sitting quietly at the counter, watched her father with wide eyes. She didn't fully understand the conflict, but she sensed the gravity in his gaze, the weight of decisions that went beyond discipline and into the heart of what it meant to lead a family. And in that moment, David realized something profound. The battle lines were not just drawn with Jason and Maya. They were drawn within his own household, between him and Clara, between the present and the past, between illusion and reality. He would have to hold his ground, not with anger, not with threats, but with unwavering action, because tonight, the first fracture had occurred. The challenge had been made. And David knew, deep in his bones, that from this moment forward, the house he had built would never be the same again. That night, after the storm in the living room, the house was heavy with silence. The usual hum of activity, the clatter of dishes, the laughter from a shared show, the chatter of teenagers, was replaced with something colder, weightier, and undeniable. David sat alone at the kitchen table, the dim light casting soft shadows across his face. He watched his daughter, Lily, swinging her small legs back and forth at the counter, her innocent eyes bright even in the tension. Lily looked up at him and smiled softly, unaware of the undercurrents swirling through the rest of the household. "Dad," she said quietly, her voice small but steady, "you're my real dad, 'cause you're the one who's here." The words hung in the air like a gentle but powerful echo. They were not accusations, nor were they cries for attention. They were truth, simple and unshakable. And in that moment, David felt a quiet ache in his chest, a mix of relief, love, and determination. Lily saw him not as a stepfather, not as a placeholder, not as a shadow of another man. She saw him for what he truly was, the one who showed up, the one who protected, the one who carried the weight of family. For years, David had measured his worth in quiet ways, fixing broken things, paying bills, shoveling snow before anyone else stirred, staying up late to help with homework, being present when Leo never had been. And yet, despite all that, the teenager's defiance had reminded him that presence alone was not enough for them to understand respect. But Lily's words crystallized a truth he had known all along. His actions mattered more than his words. David's mind wandered back to the confrontation earlier that evening. Jason's sneer, Maya's sarcastic tone, Clara's anxious pleas. They all mingled in his memory. And yet, he felt no anger, only clarity. The moment had passed. The words had been said. The challenge had been thrown. And now it was time to act. This was not a decision made in haste. For weeks, he had considered his options. Lectures, arguments, bribes, compromises. All had been tried in small ways patiently and had failed. The teenagers had tested boundaries, pushed limits, and learned that resistance often came without consequence. But tonight, David realized the lesson had to be undeniable. The foundation of his authority could no longer be ignored or undermined. It had to be felt, not argued. He rose from his chair and walked to the study, where he kept a set of keys he had long reserved for emergencies. There were keys to the front door, the back door, and the garage. There were access codes to the Wi-Fi and passwords for streaming accounts. Even credit cards that had been shared with the children, without question, were under his control. Each item represented not just privilege, but a small thread of influence, a reminder that life was not free from responsibility. David began to make a plan in his mind. He would not yell, he would not threaten, he would not demand their respect with words. Instead, he would create a reality in which entitlement had limits, in which freedom was connected to responsibility, and in which they could feel the weight of consequence firsthand. He thought of Clara. He knew she would be alarmed, upset even at the severity of his decisions. She would see him as harsh, unforgiving, maybe even cruel. But David knew that if he did not act, the household would continue its quiet erosion of respect. If he delayed, the teenagers would continue to dismiss him, and Lily would grow up in a house where defiance went unchallenged. His decisions were not meant to punish. They were meant to teach, silently, firmly, unrelentingly. And then there was Leo. The shadow of the absent father loomed large in the minds of Jason and Maya. They expected charisma, indulgence, and charm. But David understood that Leo's fleeting appearances, though glamorous, had never carried the weight of real responsibility. It was time for them to see the difference. He pictured the scene in his mind: the changed locks, the disabled Wi-Fi, the removed privileges. He imagined the shock on Jason and Maya's faces, the confusion, the outrage. And yet, beneath that, he envisioned understanding. Slow, hesitant, but undeniable. The truth had to be undeniable. David's hand rested on Lily's small shoulder as she leaned against him. She looked up, her trust unwavering, her love unquestioned. "Dad, you always know what to do," she whispered. He held her gaze for a long moment. She had no reason to understand complexities, no need to know the pain of silent endurance. She only needed to feel security, to know that someone would always show up, that someone would always carry the weight. And it was for her, more than anyone, that he would act. When the plan was fully formed in his mind, David returned to the living room. The house was quiet, the teenagers unaware of the storm about to descend. Clara sat on the sofa, hands folded. Sensing something had shifted, she glanced up at him, uncertainty in her eyes. David did not speak immediately. He simply looked at her, then at Jason and Maya, then back at her. In that moment, silence spoke volumes. And finally, with quiet resolve, he said, "Tomorrow we start anew. And this time, things will be different." He did not explain. He did not plead. He did not argue. The words were simple, but the tone carried the weight of unshakable determination. David knew that tomorrow the house would feel different, and that difference would not be in words, but in actions. As the children went to bed that night, unaware of the shift that had taken place, David stayed awake for a while longer. He thought of the years he had devoted to building this home, the sacrifices he had made, the patience he had shown, and he thought of the future. The moment when Jason and Maya would finally understand that authority is not given, nor inherited, nor demanded. It is earned, and sometimes it must be demonstrated with decisive action. By the time he went to bed himself, David was calm, resolute, and at peace. The quiet decision he had made was heavy, yes, but it was right. He would not speak of it further. He would not justify it. He would let the actions themselves teach the lesson that words never could. Tomorrow, the Miller household would awaken to a reality carefully constructed, and David would finally show them all what it truly meant to be a father. Not in charm, not in promises, not in fleeting gestures, but in presence, responsibility, and the courage to act when love demanded it. And for the first time in years, David slept with the certainty that he was ready to carry the weight of his family, fully and without compromise. The next morning, the Miller household buzzed with the restless energy of teenage frustration. Jason and Maya were quiet in the kitchen, not out of obedience, but out of disbelief. Their phones were still disconnected from the Wi-Fi. Streaming accounts remained locked, and the familiar comforts of their everyday life had vanished. The invisible threads that had tied their comfort to entitlement had been cut, and they were fumbling in the sudden emptiness. Claire arrived in the kitchen first, a mixture of worry and frustration on her face. She had watched David act with quiet decisiveness, but she still struggled to reconcile her love for him with the harsh reality the children now faced. "David," she began, voice trembling slightly, "I know you try to teach them something, but this is too much. They're still kids. You can't just take everything away like this." David, calm and collected as ever, set the coffee pot down and looked at her. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. His eyes simply met hers with quiet resolve. "Clara, they've been disrespectful for too long. They've tested boundaries and assumed comfort was automatic. This isn't punishment. This is reality. Clara's hands flew to her face, frustration mixed with fear. Reality? David, look at them. Jason's fuming. Maya's in tears. This isn't teaching, this is cruelty. David shook his head slightly, gently, almost as if correcting a child. No, it is teaching. They are learning that actions have consequences. That respect is not given because you live under the same roof. It is earned, and they need to understand that before it's too late. Jason, who had been silently simmering, slammed his fist against the table. Too late? What do you mean? This is insane. You're not even our dad. You can't just do whatever you want. Maya joined in, her voice sharp, her eyes flashing with anger. Yeah, Leo would never do this. You think just because you live here you can control everything. David's gaze turned to them, steady and unwavering. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't defend himself. Instead, he let the truth settle over them quietly. I don't need to be your father by blood, he said slowly, carefully, to be responsible for this house, to be responsible for you. Authority isn't inherited, it is carried, and I carry it every day for this family, whether you see it or not. Clara's face softened for a moment as she watched David speak, but concern still lingered in her eyes. I know you work hard, but this might break them, David. They might hate you for this. David knelt slightly to meet Lily's eye. The little girl looked up at him, her innocence shining through the tension in the room. Dad, you're my real dad, 'cause you're the one who's here, she said again, softly, almost as if confirming what he already knew in his heart. Her words hit Clara in a way nothing else could. She realized that while Jason and Maya were testing limits, Lily had already recognized what it meant to be loved, what it meant to have someone present through all the chaos of life. And for Lily, David was not just a father. He was the anchor in their home, the one who held everything steady. David stood again and walked slowly toward the fridge, opening it and pulling out juice for Lily. This house is built on more than convenience, Clara. It's built on responsibility, on showing up, on being steady. I will not allow it to be undermined by the illusion of absence or by disrespect. Jason, unable to hold back any longer, stood and shouted, You're being ridiculous. This isn't teaching us anything. You're just cruel. David looked at him, and his voice remained calm, deliberate. No, Jason. This is the first real lesson you will ever receive. One day, you'll understand that respect isn't about who yells louder or who charms better. It's about who shows up when it matters, who carries responsibility even when it's hard. Maya's voice wavered as she tried to respond. But we're your stepkids. You can't just... I can, David said softly but firmly, because I am your father in the ways that matter. I am the one who builds your home, who provides for you, who carries the weight when no one else does. Leo isn't here to teach you that. I am, and it starts now. For a long moment, silence hung over the kitchen. Clara's eyes welled with tears, a mix of fear, admiration, and realization. Jason and Maya stared, caught between anger, disbelief, and the undeniable truth that David was not going anywhere, that his presence was permanent, and that his authority was unshakable. Lily reached out and took David's hand. See, Mom, he's the one who's really here, she said simply, her voice carrying more wisdom than her years. Clara took a deep breath and nodded slowly. Perhaps, she thought, this was what love looked like, tough, unyielding, and sometimes uncomfortable. Perhaps this was what it meant to show children that care was more than indulgence, that presence mattered more than promises, and that authority carried responsibility, not just rights. David glanced at the teenagers once more. They were silent now, not from acceptance, but from shock and the realization that their world had shifted. And he knew this was only the beginning. The discomfort they felt was necessary. The lessons would not be easy, but they would be unforgettable. As he poured juice for Lily and set the table for breakfast, David felt a quiet satisfaction. The house was tense, yes, but it was alive with truth. The illusions of entitlement were cracking, and the first seeds of understanding had been sown. Tonight, he knew, the house would be uneasy. Tomorrow, the campaign would continue. And David Miller, patient, steadfast, and resolute, would ensure that the foundation he had built, through years of work, sacrifice, and presence, would never again be ignored. By late morning, the Miller household had settled into an uneasy silence. Jason and Maya moved through rooms like shadows, their phones useless, their streaming services cut, their privileges suspended. They were restless, frustrated, and beginning to understand that the comfortable world they had taken for granted no longer existed. David sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, reflecting on the tension. This was not merely a battle of discipline. It was a battle of reality versus illusion. For years, the children had romanticized their biological father, Leo, who showed up rarely, with charm and charisma, but no sense of responsibility. Now, David understood it was time to reveal the truth, to let the fantasy crumble under the weight of reality. He picked up his phone, fingers hovering over Leo's number. The image of the man flashed on the screen. Smooth, confident, always in control of appearances, yet absent when it truly mattered. For Jason and Maya, Leo had always been the hero they wanted. But David knew the truth. Leo was unreliable, indulgent, and incapable of carrying the responsibilities that defined real fatherhood. With a calm, deliberate breath, David pressed call. "Lo," he said when the call connected, "I need you to come pick up Jason and Maya." A pause. Leo's voice came, warm, casual, as if unaware of the tension that hung over the Miller household. Hey, David, is everything okay? I was just—" "They are your children," David interrupted, voice firm. "They only answer to you now. I've done what I can, but you need to take responsibility for them." Leo laughed nervously, a hollow sound that carried none of the authority the children imagined he had. "Whoa, wait, what? Responsibility? I'm kind of busy right now." David's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Busy? You've been busy your whole life avoiding responsibility. Now it's time to step up. Come and get them." Jason and Maya had been hovering nearby, straining to hear the conversation. Their eyes widened as they realized David had taken the bold step of involving Leo directly. They had expected him to intervene on their behalf, to smooth over the tension, to restore the privileges they had lost. But David had done the opposite. Leo stammered. My apartment isn't really set up for, I've got work. Jason's face fell. "Wait, you're not coming?" His voice trembled between shock and disappointment. "Nope," David said simply, closing the distance in tone with quiet finality. "You'll see that the life you've idolized doesn't exist. You answer to me, or you face the consequences here." For the first time, the children looked at David with something new, a mix of awe, disbelief, and recognition. The illusion of Leo's perfection shattered, leaving a void where reality had been ignored for too long. The man they had idolized as charming, capable, and heroic was nothing more than an absence disguised as presence. Leo's excuses continued for a few moments, but David ended the call, leaving only silence on the line. Jason and Maya's mouths were open, words caught somewhere between frustration and dawning understanding. "See," David said softly, turning to them. "This is what real responsibility looks like. He may be your father by blood, but I am your father by presence, by consistency, by showing up when it matters. That is what makes a parent, not promises, not charm." Maya's eyes welled up. "So, all this time, he wasn't there?" Jason looked down, swallowing hard. We thought he was the best." David knelt slightly to meet their gaze, calm and unwavering. "He's been absent. That's the truth. And now, you get to choose whether you respect a person who actually shows up, who actually carries the weight, or continue believing in illusions. Lily, standing nearby, smiled faintly and whispered, "See, he's here." Her words were simple, yet piercing in their clarity. They reminded Jason and Maya what mattered: presence over promises, action over charm. The days stretched on with a heavy quiet. Jason and Maya were subdued, their bravado replaced by cautious reflection. The house, once a battlefield of entitlement and defiance, had become a classroom of reality. David knew that change was slow, uncomfortable, and often resisted. But the first fracture had appeared in the illusion that had held the children captive. The myth of Leo's heroism. The real lesson had begun. Respect, authority, and responsibility were no longer abstract concepts. They were lived, visible, and unavoidable. By evening, as the children sat quietly at the kitchen table, pondering their day, David allowed himself a small sigh. The battle with illusions was never easy. The tension, the defiance, the comparisons, all would require time, patience, and unwavering action to overcome. But tonight, the Miller household had taken the first real step toward understanding. Leo's absence had been exposed. Privilege without respect had been challenged. And the children were beginning, however reluctantly, to see the man who had carried them through every day that truly mattered. In that quiet, tense evening, David Miller felt a sense of resolve stronger than ever. The house was his to guide, to protect, and to teach. The lessons would be hard, yes, but they were necessary. And for the first time, the children could see, without illusion or charm, who their real father truly was. The day after the confrontation with Leo dawned clear and quiet over Oakhaven. The streets shimmered with early morning light. Birds chirped in the trees, and neighbors went about their routines, oblivious to the subtle revolution taking place inside the Miller household. Inside, however, the atmosphere was different. Jason and Maya moved through the kitchen and living room with a new, cautious awareness. The chaotic defiance that had marked their interactions with David had softened. Not entirely, but enough to signal the beginning of change. Breakfast was prepared as usual. Eggs, toast, orange juice, simple, familiar, yet carrying a newfound weight. Jason poked at his food silently, glancing up occasionally at his father. Maya, normally chatty and quick with a sarcastic remark, sat quietly, fidgeting with her hands. Neither dared speak first. The tension was no longer explosive but heavy with reflection. David observed them calmly, knowing that the most effective lessons were learned in silence. Authority, he had learned, was not something to announce. It was something to embody. It was a quiet presence, the steady hand, the unwavering consistency that gradually shifted perception. He poured himself coffee and took a sip, letting the silence speak louder than any lecture ever could. Lily, ever perceptive, swung her legs at the counter and looked up at him. "Dad, are they okay?" she asked, innocence in her voice. David smiled gently. "They will be, Lily. They just have to understand something important. That respect isn't given freely. It is noticed, earned, and sometimes quietly enforced." Clara entered the room. Her worry softened into cautious admiration. She had spent the last 24 hours observing the change, struggling between fear and recognition of David's steadfastness. The household was uneasy, yes, but it was also shifting toward truth. Jason finally broke the silence, his voice hesitant, almost reluctant. "Dad, I think I understand. Maybe." Maya looked at him, her brow furrowed. "Understand what?" Jason sighed, a mixture of frustration and dawning realization. "I don't know. I guess we always thought we could push you around, that nothing mattered. But it does. Everything's connected to you. You're here. You actually show up." David nodded slightly, acknowledging the first glimmer of comprehension. "That's right. Presence matters more than promises. Actions matter more than words. Respect isn't automatic. It's noticed in how you treat the people who show up for you. Maya's voice was quieter now, less sharp, less mocking. So, all the stuff we've been taking for granted, the Wi-Fi, the car, everything, it wasn't really ours? You were giving it? Yes, David said simply, his tone calm. And giving it doesn't mean disrespect is acceptable. Privilege comes with responsibility. Comfort comes with acknowledgement. That's the difference between taking for granted and appreciating what is truly given. The teenagers exchanged looks, slowly processing the weight of his words. For years, they had idolized Leo, the absent father whose charm seemed infinite. But David had shown them something different: reality, reliability, presence, steadfastness. And now, for the first time, the contrast was undeniable. The rest of the morning passed in quiet reflection. Jason and Maya moved through small tasks without complaint, a subtle shift in demeanor that signaled the beginnings of understanding. David did not praise him excessively, did not declare victory. He simply continued his role as the steady foundation of the home, the quiet authority that was always present, always consistent. Lily, ever intuitive, looked between her older siblings and her father. "See," she whispered softly. "He's here. He's the one who really cares." Her words, innocent yet piercing in their clarity, seemed to echo in the room. Jason and Maya avoided eye contact, the weight of reality pressing upon them. For the first time, they felt the absence of entitlement, the discomfort of consequence, and the undeniable truth of their father's authority. Clara watched silently, a mixture of relief and awe on her face. The house was still tense, but it was no longer fractured by rebellion. Respect, subtle and quiet, had begun to take root. David reflected on the shift with calm satisfaction. The battle had not been won with anger, shouting, or punishment. It had been won with presence, action, and the unwavering weight of responsibility. The teenagers were beginning to understand, not fully, not yet, but enough to see that the foundation of authority in this home was real, steady, and unyielding. By evening, the house settled into a new rhythm. Jason and Maya were subdued, their defiance replaced by cautious recognition. Small gestures of respect emerged, requests phrased politely, acknowledgments of responsibility, tentative cooperation with household tasks. The tension that had once dominated every corner was replaced with an uneasy but hopeful silence. David looked at Lily swinging her legs at the table, her smile unwavering, and knew that the hardest part of the lesson was not about the teenagers. It was about creating a household where presence, responsibility, and respect were lived truths, not empty words. For the first time in years, the Miller house was quiet, steady, and real. The illusions of entitlement had begun to crack, and the children were starting to see, slowly but surely, who their real father truly was. David sat back, sipping his coffee, and allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The silence in the house was not emptiness. It was respect, quiet and hard-earned, and it was more powerful than any shouting, any argument, or any charm could ever be. The following week in the Miller household unfolded differently than any week before. The air, once thick with defiance and tension, carried a tentative calm. Jason and Maya moved through their days with careful awareness, their actions subtly altered by the lessons David had begun to enforce. David observed these shifts quietly. He did not rush to praise or acknowledge the changes. Authority, he had learned, was strengthened not through acknowledgement but through consistency. The small, almost imperceptible gestures of respect, however, were unmistakable signs that his quiet campaign was beginning to take hold. It began in small ways. Jason asked before borrowing the car instead of taking it for granted. Maya approached David to request permission to use the Wi-Fi, phrasing her request politely rather than demanding it. At first, the requests were hesitant, awkward, and laced with disbelief. But they were requests nonetheless, an acknowledgement that boundaries existed and that David's authority was real. David responded calmly, granting the request with measured discretion. There were no lectures, no grand announcements, only the steady enforcement of rules and expectations. Each small interaction was a reinforcement, a lesson wrapped in daily life, and the teenagers slowly began to understand that respect was earned through presence, responsibility, and consistency, not entitlement or manipulation. Clara, watching from the sidelines, felt a mix of relief and awe. The household was shifting from chaos to structure, from defiance to understanding. She realized that David's approach, though firm and at times harsh, was teaching the children lessons they could not learn from charm or absence. One afternoon, as David worked in the garage fixing a leaking pipe, Jason approached him, hesitation in every step. "Dad," he began slowly, I want to thank you for, the other day, about everything." David paused, his hand stilling on the wrench. He looked at his stepson, his expression calm but attentive. "Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you saying that. But remember, the lesson isn't about thanks. It's about understanding responsibility and respect." Jason nodded, the faintest hint of a smile forming. I get it now. I guess I never really thought about it that way before." Meanwhile, Maya, inspired by her brother's tentative acknowledgement, began to take initiative around the house. She tidied common areas without being asked politely before using privileges, and even helped Lily with her homework. The transformation was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Lily, ever observant, noticed the changes immediately. "Mom, look," Jason said, "please, before using the car," she exclaimed with excitement only a child could summon. Clara smiled, a mix of pride and relief washing over her. She looked at David, who had returned to garage work, and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." He simply nodded, eyes focused on the task at hand. For him, the changes mattered more than recognition. The household was beginning to align with the values he had worked to instill: presence, responsibility, and respect. Evenings became calmer. The tension that had once dominated conversations and interactions faded into cautious cooperation. Jason and Maya were still learning, still testing limits in small ways, but their defiance no longer ruled the house. They began to see the tangible consequences of their actions or inactions, and the quiet authority of David was firmly established in their daily lives. One night, as the family gathered around the dinner table, David observed a simple scene unfolding before him. Lily chatting happily, Jason asking politely for seconds, Maya helping clear the table. The small gestures, seemingly mundane, carried a weight that words could never convey. Respect was no longer abstract. It was tangible, visible, lived in each action and choice. Clara reached over and gently touched David's hand. "They're changing," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "I didn't think they would, but they are." David nodded, a small, quiet smile forming. "It's not about them changing because I demanded it. It's about them learning that actions have meaning, that presence matters, and that respect is noticed when it is earned. That's the real change." The week closed with a sense of cautious optimism. The household was not perfect. There were still moments of hesitation, of old patterns testing boundaries, but the turning tide was undeniable. Jason and Maya were beginning to grasp the reality that authority was not a title, but a responsibility, and in doing so, they were slowly learning the value of respect, responsibility, and presence. David reflected on the transformation quietly that night. The journey was far from over, but the first cracks in entitlement had appeared, and the seeds of understanding had been sown. Presence had triumphed over absence. Responsibility had eclipsed charm, and respect, hard-earned and quiet, was beginning to take root in the hearts of the teenagers he had chosen to guide. As he watched Lily fall asleep with a peaceful smile, he knew that the hardest part of parenting and teaching was not in enforcing rules, but in patiently embodying the lessons one wished to impart. The household was changing slowly but surely, and for the first time in years, David Miller felt the weight of his role not as a burden, but as a quiet victory, a foundation upon which true family could finally be built. The following week in the Miller household unfolded differently than any week before. The air, once thick with defiance and tension, carried a tentative calm. Jason and Maya moved through their days with careful awareness, their actions subtly altered by the lessons David had begun to enforce. David observed these shifts quietly. He did not rush to praise or acknowledge the changes. Authority, he had learned, was strengthened not through acknowledgement but through consistency. The small, almost imperceptible gestures of respect, however, were unmistakable signs that his quiet campaign was beginning to take hold. It began in small ways. Jason asked before borrowing the car instead of taking it for granted. Maya approached David to request permission to use the Wi-Fi, phrasing her request politely rather than demanding it. At first, the requests were hesitant, awkward, and laced with disbelief. But they were requests nonetheless, an acknowledgement that boundaries existed and that David's authority was real. David responded calmly, granting the request with measured discretion. There were no lectures, no grand announcements, only the steady enforcement of rules and expectations. Each small interaction was a reinforcement, a lesson wrapped in daily life, and the teenagers slowly began to understand that respect was earned through presence, responsibility, and consistency, not entitlement or manipulation. Clara, watching from the sidelines, felt a mix of relief and awe. The household was shifting from chaos to structure, from defiance to understanding. She realized that David's approach, though firm and at times harsh, was teaching the children lessons they could not learn from charm or absence. One afternoon, as David worked in the garage fixing a leaking pipe, Jason approached him, hesitation in every step. "Dad," he began slowly, I want to thank you for, the other day, about everything." David paused, his hand stilling on the wrench. He looked at his stepson, his expression calm but attentive. "Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you saying that. But remember, the lesson isn't about thanks. It's about understanding responsibility and respect." Jason nodded, the faintest hint of a smile forming. I get it now. I guess I never really thought about it that way before." Meanwhile, Maya, inspired by her brother's tentative acknowledgement, began to take initiative around the house. She tidied common areas without being asked politely before using privileges, and even helped Lily with her homework. The transformation was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Lily, ever observant, noticed the changes immediately. "Mom, look," Jason said, "please, before using the car," she exclaimed with excitement only a child could summon. Clara smiled, a mix of pride and relief washing over her. She looked at David, who had returned to garage work, and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." He simply nodded, eyes focused on the task at hand. For him, the changes mattered more than recognition. The household was beginning to align with the values he had worked to instill: presence, responsibility, and respect. Evenings became calmer. The tension that had once dominated conversations and interactions faded into cautious cooperation. Jason and Maya were still learning, still testing limits in small ways, but their defiance no longer ruled the house. They began to see the tangible consequences of their actions or inactions, and the quiet authority of David was firmly established in their daily lives. One night, as the family gathered around the dinner table, David observed a simple scene unfolding before him. Lily chatting happily, Jason asking politely for seconds, Maya helping clear the table. The small gestures, seemingly mundane, carried a weight that words could never convey. Respect was no longer abstract. It was tangible, visible, lived in each action and choice. Clara reached over and gently touched David's hand. "They're changing," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "I didn't think they would, but they are." David nodded, a small, quiet smile forming. "It's not about them changing because I demanded it. It's about them learning that actions have meaning, that presence matters, and that respect is noticed when it is earned. That's the real change. The week closed with a sense of cautious optimism. The household was not perfect. There were still moments of hesitation, of old patterns testing boundaries, but the turning tide was undeniable. Jason and Maya were beginning to grasp the reality that authority was not a title, but a responsibility. And in doing so, they were slowly learning the value of respect, responsibility, and presence. David reflected on the transformation quietly that night. The journey was far from over, but the first cracks in entitlement had appeared, and the seeds of understanding had been sown. Presence had triumphed over absence. Responsibility had eclipsed charm, and respect, hard-earned and quiet, was beginning to take root in the hearts of the teenagers he had chosen to guide. As he watched Lily fall asleep with a peaceful smile, he knew that the hardest part of parenting and teaching was not in enforcing rules, but in patiently embodying the lessons one wished to impart. The household was changing slowly but surely, and for the first time in years, David Miller felt the weight of his role not as a burden, but as a quiet victory, a foundation upon which true family could finally be built. Days turned into a week, and the Miller household, once tense and fractured, began to hum with subtle shifts. The air was lighter, not entirely free of tension, but filled with cautious respect and tentative cooperation. Jason had started asking for guidance instead of arguing. Maya helped with chores voluntarily, sometimes even anticipating needs before being asked. The house, which had been divided by defiance and entitlement, was slowly knitting itself together. The first cracks in rebellion were healing over, replaced by gestures of acknowledgement and small acts of responsibility. One afternoon, David sat at the kitchen table reviewing some bills when Jason approached him. There was hesitation in his step, a nervous energy that revealed his internal struggle. "Dad, can I talk to you?" Jason asked quietly, avoiding eye contact. David looked up, calm and steady. "Of course, Jason. What's on your mind?" Jason fidgeted with his hands, then took a deep breath. I know I haven't treated you right. I acted like you weren't important, like everything you did didn't matter. But I see now you've been here for us all along. You've been the one keeping this family together. Even when we didn't notice." David felt a quiet surge of pride, tempered by the understanding that true respect wasn't given all at once. "I'm glad you see that, Jason. It's not about recognition, though. It's about learning that family is about showing up, carrying responsibility, and treating each other with respect." Jason nodded, swallowing hard. I want to do better. I want to show that I understand." Meanwhile, Maya approached David later that afternoon, holding a stack of folded laundry. "I know I've been difficult," she said softly, "but I want to help. I want to do my part, and I respect you." David smiled faintly, warmth in his eyes. "That's all I ask, Maya. Respect and effort, showing up when it matters." The change was subtle, almost invisible at first, but undeniable. The household was beginning to feel less like a battlefield and more like a home, where tension had once dominated, cooperation and recognition were taking root. Even Lily sensed a shift. Her giggles were no longer drowned out by the bickering of her older siblings. She played freely in the living room, occasionally looking up to David for reassurance, and receiving it in quiet smiles and steady presence. Clara, witnessing the transformation, felt a mixture of relief and admiration. She had feared that the confrontation with Leo, the withdrawal of privileges, and the firm boundaries might break the household. Yet, she saw the opposite happening. Bridges were forming over the broken ground of defiance and entitlement. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Jason made a deliberate effort to set the table, placing utensils neatly, asking politely for help from Maya. Maya, in turn, assisted without complaint, her previous sharpness replaced by a willingness to cooperate. Lily chattered happily, the harmony in the room growing with each passing moment. David observed quietly, his heart swelling with satisfaction. The road had been long and arduous, but the lessons were taking hold. Authority, he realized, was not about control or domination. It was about presence, consistency, and the quiet demonstration of responsibility. The respect the teenagers were beginning to show was earned, not demanded. A fragile yet powerful testament to the foundation he had built. Later that night, Clara approached him as he read in the living room. "David, I have to admit, I didn't think this would work. I was afraid they'd resent you forever." David closed his book and looked at her, calm and steady. "It's not about making them like me," he said gently. "It's about teaching them what respect, responsibility, and presence truly mean. That doesn't come from charm or convenience. It comes from living the values every day." Clara nodded slowly, the weight of understanding settling in. "And they're learning," she whispered. "Yes," David said, glancing at the quiet house. "They are, slowly but surely." The night settled over Oakhaven, calm and still. The house, once fractured by defiance and entitlement, was beginning to heal. Small acts of respect, quiet acknowledgments, and deliberate efforts to cooperate were forming the bridges over the broken ground of past misunderstandings. David reflected quietly, the weight of his role settling on his shoulders like a familiar mantle. Authority had never been about biology, about appearances, or about charm. It had always been about presence, responsibility, and the unwavering demonstration of care. And now, those lessons were taking root in the hearts of Jason and Maya. In that quiet, reflective night, David felt a sense of accomplishment deeper than any words could capture. The household was changing, the bridges were forming, and the foundation he had built, through years of patient work, quiet action, and steadfast presence, was stronger than ever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Yes, but for the first time in years, David Miller could rest knowing that the house he had built was not just a structure of walls and roofs, but a home built on respect, responsibility, and love. The Miller household had changed in ways that were both subtle and profound. The days of chaos, defiance, and entitlement had given way to a rhythm of quiet respect, responsibility, and shared understanding. Jason and Maya no longer saw David merely as a stepfather, nor as a figure to challenge. They were beginning to recognize the steady presence and authority that had always been there, patiently waiting for acknowledgement. One crisp morning, David woke early, the sun casting gentle light through the windows. Lily was already up, playing quietly, her innocence untouched by the previous tension. He watched her for a moment, smiling softly, before heading to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The aroma of coffee, toast, and scrambled eggs filled the house, a signal that life continued in its ordinary, yet transformed, rhythm. Jason appeared first, tentatively, as he often did now. "Dad, can I help with breakfast?" he asked quietly, the words no longer carrying defiance but a genuine desire to contribute. David nodded, a warm, approving smile forming. "Of course, Jason. Thank you." Maya soon joined, offering to help set the table. Her movements were careful, deliberate, and her tone polite. It was a stark contrast to the sharp, sarcastic voice that had once dominated the household. These small gestures, though seemingly mundane, carried immense weight. They were proof that lessons had begun to root themselves firmly in the hearts of the children. Clara entered the kitchen, taking in the scene with a mixture of relief and quiet pride. She watched as her family, once fractured, moved in a harmony born from understanding rather than obligation. She realized that David's patient, consistent approach had reshaped the household in a way that charm or coercion never could. Over breakfast, conversation flowed naturally. Jason asked questions politely, genuinely interested in David's advice on schoolwork. Maya shared thoughts on her day, careful to acknowledge her father's guidance. Lily chimed in with innocent observations, bringing laughter and warmth to the table. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary, a family functioning not just under one roof, but under shared understanding and respect. Later that afternoon, David sat with Jason and Maya in the living room. The atmosphere was relaxed, a testament to the progress that had been made. "I want you both to understand something important," David began, his voice calm, deliberate. Being a family isn't about blood or titles. It's about showing up, taking responsibility, and caring for one another consistently. That's what makes a family strong. Jason looked at him, sincerity in his eyes. I get it now, Dad. I see what you've been doing all these years, and I respect it. Maya nodded, her voice quiet but firm. Me too. I didn't understand before, but I do now. You're always here. You've been the one keeping this house together. I respect that. David's chest swelled with quiet pride. The words were not demanded, not coerced. They were heartfelt, born from genuine understanding. This was a culmination of the lessons he had worked to instill. Respect earned through presence, authority demonstrated through consistent action, and love expressed through responsibility. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, there was laughter, warmth, and shared conversation. The house, once a battleground of defiance and entitlement, was now a home in every sense of the word. Lily played nearby, her trust and joy a reflection of the environment her father had nurtured. Jason and Maya, though still learning, had begun to carry themselves with newfound awareness and respect. Clara watched quietly, a smile touching her lips. She realized that David had not only transformed the children, but had also transformed the family itself. The foundation he had built, through years of quiet labor, patience, and unwavering presence, had finally borne fruit. Later, as the house settled into the calm of night, David reflected on the journey. The battle had been long, the lessons hard, and the resistance fierce. But through steadfast presence, deliberate action, and unwavering responsibility, he had reshaped not just the household, but the hearts of those within it. He looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, and then at Jason and Maya, who were quietly reading in their rooms, the weight of the day's lessons settling in their minds. He realized that true authority was not declared, but demonstrated. True respect was not demanded, but earned. And true family was not defined by biology, but by presence, care, and unwavering commitment. In that quiet, reflective moment, David felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The house was no longer fractured. It was whole. The lessons had been learned, the bridges had been built, and the foundation of respect and understanding was solid. For the first time in years, the Miller family could breathe together, live together, and grow together, not as a collection of individuals under one roof, but as a family forged through patience, action, and love. David smiled softly, knowing that the journey was ongoing, but confident that the principles he had instilled would guide his family through any challenge. The home he had built was no longer just a structure. It was a sanctuary, a testament to the quiet power of presence, responsibility, and unwavering care. The Miller household had changed in ways that were both subtle and profound. The days of chaos, defiance, and entitlement had given way to a rhythm of quiet respect, responsibility, and shared understanding. Jason and Maya no longer saw David merely as a stepfather, nor as a figure to challenge. They were beginning to recognize the steady presence and authority that had always been there, patiently waiting for acknowledgement. One crisp morning, David woke early, the sun casting gentle light through the windows. Lily was already up, playing quietly, her innocence untouched by the previous tension. He watched her for a moment, smiling softly, before heading to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The aroma of coffee, toast, and scrambled eggs filled the house, a signal that life continued in its ordinary, yet transformed, rhythm. Jason appeared first, tentatively, as he often did now. "Dad, can I help with breakfast?" he asked quietly, the words no longer carrying defiance but a genuine desire to contribute. David nodded, a warm, approving smile forming. "Of course, Jason. Thank you." Maya soon joined, offering to help set the table. Her movements were careful, deliberate, and her tone polite. It was a stark contrast to the sharp, sarcastic voice that had once dominated the household. These small gestures, though seemingly mundane, carried immense weight. They were proof that lessons had begun to root themselves firmly in the hearts of the children. Clara entered the kitchen, taking in the scene with a mixture of relief and quiet pride. She watched as her family, once fractured, moved in a harmony born from understanding rather than obligation. She realized that David's patient, consistent approach had reshaped the household in a way that charm or coercion never could. Over breakfast, conversation flowed naturally. Jason asked questions politely, genuinely interested in David's advice on schoolwork. Maya shared thoughts on her day, careful to acknowledge her father's guidance. Lily chimed in with innocent observations, bringing laughter and warmth to the table. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary, a family functioning not just under one roof, but under shared understanding and respect. Later that afternoon, David sat with Jason and Maya in the living room. The atmosphere was relaxed, a testament to the progress that had been made. "I want you both to understand something important," David began, his voice calm, deliberate. "Being a family isn't about blood or titles. It's about showing up, taking responsibility, and caring for one another consistently. That's what makes a family strong." Jason looked at him, sincerity in his eyes. "I get it now, Dad. I see what you've been doing all these years, and I respect it." Maya nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "Me too. I didn't understand before, but I do now. You're always here. You've been the one keeping this house together. I respect that." David's chest swelled with quiet pride. The words were not demanded, not coerced. They were heartfelt, born from genuine understanding. This was a culmination of the lessons he had worked to instill. Respect earned through presence, authority demonstrated through consistent action, and love expressed through responsibility. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, there was laughter, warmth, and shared conversation. The house, once a battleground of defiance and entitlement, was now a home in every sense of the word. Lily played nearby, her trust and joy a reflection of the environment her father had nurtured. Jason and Maya, though still learning, had begun to carry themselves with newfound awareness and respect. Clara watched quietly, a smile touching her lips. She realized that David had not only transformed the children, but had also transformed the family itself. The foundation he had built, through years of quiet labor, patience, and unwavering presence, had finally borne fruit. Later, as the house settled into the calm of night, David reflected on the journey. The battle had been long, the lessons hard, and the resistance fierce. But through steadfast presence, deliberate action, and unwavering responsibility, he had reshaped not just the household, but the hearts of those within it. He looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, and then at Jason and Maya, who were quietly reading in their rooms, the weight of the day's lessons settling in their minds. He realized that true authority was not declared, but demonstrated. True respect was not demanded, but earned. And true family was not defined by biology, but by presence, care, and unwavering commitment. In that quiet, reflective moment, David felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The house was no longer fractured. It was whole. The lessons had been learned, the bridges had been built, and the foundation of respect and understanding was solid. For the first time in years, the Miller family could breathe together, live together, and grow together, not as a collection of individuals under one roof, but as a family forged through patience, action, and love. David smiled softly, knowing that the journey was ongoing, but confident that the principles he had instilled would guide his family through any challenge. The home he had built was no longer just a structure. It was a sanctuary, a testament to the quiet power of presence, responsibility, and unwavering care. Morning light spilled softly through the windows of the Miller household, painting the walls with warmth and promise. The house, once tense and fractured, now hummed with a quiet harmony. Every corner reflected the transformation that had taken place. Small gestures of respect, responsibility in action, and a sense of calm authority that had finally settled into daily life. David stood in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with deliberate care. Eggs sizzled on the pan, toast browned perfection, and coffee steamed in the pot. He moved with quiet efficiency, his presence steady and unshakable, the anchor of a household that had weathered storms and emerged stronger. Lily, already awake, climbed onto a stool at the counter, swinging her legs happily. "Good morning, Dad," she chirped. Her innocence and joy were a testament to the security and love that David had nurtured in the home. Jason entered next, rubbing his eyes, and offered a tentative smile. "Morning, Dad," he said, quieter than usual, yet filled with sincerity. "Thanks for everything you do." Maya followed, holding a cup of water for Lily and setting it gently on the counter. "Morning, Dad," she said softly. I'm going to help with breakfast today. We want to make it easier for you." David looked at them both and smiled, a warmth in his eyes that spoke louder than words ever could. "Thank you, both of you. That means a lot." The family moved through their morning routine with ease. Jason helped clear dishes, Maya tidied the living room, and Lily played happily nearby. The small acts, simple and ordinary, carried immense significance. They were proof that the lessons had taken hold, that respect and responsibility were no longer abstract ideas, but living truths within the household. Clara entered the kitchen, her expression a mix of pride and relief. She watched the scene unfold, David at the center, steady and calm, the children participating with thoughtfulness and care. The household was no longer a battleground of entitlement and defiance. It was a home built on trust, respect, and shared responsibility. Later, David gathered the family in the living room. The atmosphere was calm, reflective, yet filled with warmth. "I want you all to understand something important," he began, his voice steady and heartfelt. "Family is not about titles or who is real or step. It's about showing up, taking responsibility, and caring for each other every day. That's what makes a family strong, and that's what makes a home worth living in." Jason nodded, his voice firm yet gentle. "I understand now, Dad. I see what you've been doing all along. You've always been here for us, even when we didn't notice." Maya added, "Me too. I respect you, Dad, and I want to be a better part of this family, with you leading us." David felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The words were genuine, heartfelt, and the result of patience, consistency, and unwavering presence. These were the rewards of quiet authority, of lessons taught not with anger, but with steadfast action. Lily, her bright eyes wide, added innocently, "See, Mom? He's the one who's really here." Clara smiled, tears of relief and pride forming in her eyes. She reached for David's hand and squeezed it gently. "You've done it, David. You built a real family here." David looked around the room, at the children, his wife, and the calm, warm household they now shared. He knew the journey was far from over. Life would continue to bring challenges, misunderstandings, and tests of patience. But the foundation was secure. The principles of presence, responsibility, and respect had been planted firmly in the hearts of his children. As the morning light brightened the room, David reflected quietly on the journey that had brought them here. The battles fought, the lessons enforced, and the patience exercised had all led to this moment. A home transformed, a family united, and a sense of peace that resonated deeper than any shouting or charm could ever achieve. The Miller household, once fractured and divided, was now whole. The children had learned that authority was not about biology, but about presence. They had discovered that respect was not demanded, but earned. And the family had understood, finally, that love was measured in consistency, care, and unwavering commitment. David poured himself a final cup of coffee, sitting quietly as the family moved around him. The house was alive with laughter, conversation, and a sense of belonging. The locks on the doors, the privileges once withheld, and the boundaries now respected were all symbols of a deeper truth. That family is built through actions, not promises, and that love is proven through presence, not absence. In that quiet, reflective morning, David Miller felt profound peace. The home he had nurtured, the family he had guided, and the lessons he had instilled had all come together in harmony. A new dawn had risen over Oakhaven, not just in the sunlight spilling through the windows, but in the hearts of the family he had worked so tirelessly to protect and unite. And as the day began, full of promise and quiet understanding, David knew that the home he had built was no longer just a shelter. It was a sanctuary, a place where presence mattered, responsibility was respected, and love was demonstrated every day. A home where respect had been earned, lessons had been learned, and a family had finally come together, whole, strong, and unbreakable.